Good evening and welcome to Wanderlust Wednesdays. My name is Joost Ouendag and today I will be talking about Iceland's natural beauty. That's not just a topic, it's also the name of our latest and greatest cruise in that area. It's part of our Welcome Back cruises. It's tailor-made to this island and to what we can and cannot do in the current world. We're super excited about it. We're going to dive right in. It's round trip Reykjavik, 8 days, 6 guided tours. It's just one country. And we start with this in Reykjavik. So you see the entire overview here. We start in Reykjavik. We have a full day the next day in Reykjavik. Then we visit Ísafjörður, which is, if you, I'll show you a map, it makes it a little easier. Here's a map, and so you're in a part of the country called the Westfjords, and in the top right-hand corner of this map, top left-hand corner of this map, you can see Ísafjörður. We then continue on to Akureyri. And that's in the north. That is sometimes called the capital of the north. And then we continue to the east side of the island, to Seyðisfjörður, to Djúpivogur, and finally to the Westman Islands at the bottom of your screen and at the south end of the island. And then you return to Reykjavik. And one of the first things, of course, that you will want to know is when's the best time to travel to Iceland? Last time I was there in January, and I have to say any time is a good time to go to Iceland, but we offer this cruise starting in June all the way through September. And here's what you need to know. Essentially, it's in summer, Iceland is surprisingly friendly as far as the climate is concerned. You'll have days where you don't even need to wear a jacket. I would always bring layered clothing because you never quite know. And if the wind comes from the north, it does get a little chilly. But overall, June, July, August are summer months. They can be quite warm. One of the things that you always need to keep in mind in this part of the world is that you're far north. In areas where there's a little bit of permafrost or where there's a lot of standing water, you always need to bring good insect repellent, especially in summer. And then towards the end of August and in September, it gets a little cooler. You'll probably have bigger and thicker cloud covers. The crowds are going to be gone mostly. So will most of the insects. But it does get a little cooler. And like I said, we offer this itinerary June, July, August, and September. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's start with Reykjavik. And I will focus quite a bit here on the shore excursions that we offer. As you may know, initially at least, we will bring you off the ship, but we would like you to travel with us. So the shore excursions are the way to do this. As soon as it is safe to do so, we will go back to allowing you more freedom. But for the time being, we're doing it in an organized fashion. We have someone with you at all times. You travel, if you will, a little bit in a bubble, and we're making that as comfortable as we can. I'm sure that you will not really notice that there's that much of a difference. Our itineraries are evolving, so are our shore excursions. We are continually adding capacities as we see how things develop and as we see how people that have already booked the cruises are booking the shore excursions. This is sometimes a little bit of a challenge, to be quite frank. In some parts of the world, people have not been driving their coaches, have not been guiding guests around for over a year. And, people are sometimes a little rusty and not all the emails get answered as quickly as we would like them to. So it takes a little bit for people to shift gears again. Everyone's super excited that we're going back into the destinations. But but sometimes it takes a little bit more time. And this is why you may on occasion find that if you've already booked the cruise, that you may not get that particular shore excursion you want. We're adding capacity as quickly as we can, basically. So let's talk about Reykjavik to begin with. There's an included shore excursion that really just takes you through the highlights of the city, and there are quite a few. I'm going to show you one right now. This is a very well-known icon of Reykjavik, I would say. It's the Hallgrímur Kirkja. You can see it from very far away. It's not the tallest building. It's actually the second tallest building, but no one really recognizes the tallest building because it's fairly nondescript. And the gentleman to the right, that is Leif Erikson, who is the man who sailed from Iceland into the New World, who landed at what we now think is Lanzo Meadows, or we think he landed there. We know that Lanzo Meadows is there. It's a place in Canada, but we think that this is where where Leif Erikson first set foot ashore in the New World. The city tour, if you will, takes you to the church. It takes you to some other locations around town, and it really gives you a flavor of what Reykjavik has to offer. And then to kind of have a miniature version of what Iceland has to offer, we take you on an excursion that focuses on the Golden Ring. You get a little bit of a view of Reykjavik, but the main attractions on the Golden Ring are this here waterfall. So this is Gullfoss, and it's one of the most famous and probably one of the prettiest waterfalls in all of Iceland. Gullfoss is one of the highlights of this itinerary. It's a relatively small area, and it's amazing how much you can pack into just a few hours. And it's not just the natural world, it's also the history of Iceland. We take you to Thingvellir, which is the location of the first parliament in the world, really. It goes back more than 1,000 years, where the Icelanders would come together, the first settlers would come together, and Parliament is a little bit of a misnomer because it was mainly it was a law court, if you will. It started off as a law court, and then people more and more started to come together to create laws, but it started really, if you will, as a courthouse. And not too far from there is an area where you can see what lives below the surface in much of Iceland. Iceland sits on what is known as the Mid-Atlantic Rift. And this is an area in the world where two tectonic plates are basically just enormous chunks of the Earth's crust. You may remember this from geology lessons in school. And here in Iceland, they drift apart, these plates. It goes very, very, very slowly, but still they move apart by about 8 millimeters every year. And as these plates move apart from the inner core of the Earth, lava bubbles up, and that heats the Earth crust. And in a lot of places in Iceland, this is not just a place where you have volcanoes, but you'll have all kinds of hydrothermal or hydrogeological features, such as geysers, water spouting out of the ground, mud pots, where you can see molten rock kind of blubbering away. Looks somewhat unappealing, but it's totally fascinating, and that is also a big part of the Golden Circle. These geological features. As I said, it's kind of Iceland in miniature, and then of course a great pastime in Reykjavik is whale watching. This is also something that we don't just do in Reykjavik, and I think this is maybe a very important principle to explain right off the bat. There are at least 2 other places in Iceland where you can do great whale watching. There are at least 2 places on this itinerary where you can do bird watching. There are at least 3 places on this itinerary where you can go for a hike. So the itinerary overall focuses a lot on the great outdoors, and we try in many places to duplicate the experience, because the natural world, you never really duplicate. If you see a breaching humpback whale like in this picture, it's not like you would ever get tired of this. So if this is what you would like to do, you can do this in one or more places. And if you like to pick and choose a little bit and mix and match, you don't have to do it here in Reykjavik. You can do it in another place in Iceland. So we focus for obvious purposes, social distancing, the great outdoors. We focus a lot on the natural world. Another great thing to do outside in Reykjavik is horseback riding. Icelandic horses, they're not just beautiful, they're also kind of unique. They can do something most horses outside of Iceland cannot do. And it's a way of walking that's called a tult. And a tult is a way for the horse to move itself that is really, really easy on the rider. It's perfect for novices. If you don't sit on a horse every day and you have an Icelandic horse, you'll be surprised at how easy it is to develop a little bit of speed. You will not sit on that, even if you're a novice, you will not sit on that horse and feel that you're being stirred, not shaken, or shaken, not stirred. It's quite an experience. And of course, it is a very essentially Icelandic experience. These horses were introduced by the first Vikings that came to Iceland. So these horses have been there for thousands of years. And very early on, it was clear that those Icelandic horses, if they were to leave the island, they should never come back. And no other horses are imported just like that. So it is a bloodline, if you will, that is of the Icelandic horses that has been preserved for 1,000 years. Very unique horses, very much a part of Iceland, Icelandic culture, Icelandic tradition. Enough about Reykjavik, let's move on to Ísafjörður. And Ísafjörður is a town that is, sorry, I'm going a little fast for my own good, but Ísafjörður is beautiful in the sense that it was in the early 20th century that it started to really boom. And this had everything to do with the fishing boom that occurred at that time. And all of a sudden, people in Iceland had money. Iceland, up until that time, was very, very poor. And whole houses, prefab, if you will, and they weren't called prefab, but that's kind of what they were. They were imported primarily from Norway. And those are the houses that you still see in Ísafjörður today. And they're very colorful. You can tell that there are whole streets, and this image is actually a really good example. There are whole streets that have houses that are all from the same period, and it makes Ísafjörður very, very pretty. It's on a very sheltered bay, and that allows you to do something that's not that evident in other coastal areas where it may get a little choppy. But Ísafjörður is ideal to do some kayaking. And this obviously is a shot very early in the morning. You'll be there a little later. You arrive in Ísafjörður around 8 o'clock in the morning. But it is just such a gorgeous way of exploring the surroundings. And then those surroundings, it's not just those mountains, although, again, you would never get tired of just the scenery, because it is such a, and I don't quite know how to put it, but it's almost not on a human scale. It's such a young part of the world, and it's so untouched that you really feel more like a visitor in the landscape than there's so little in the landscape that is not man-made. It makes such a raw, beautiful impression. But there's more. There's not just the landscape itself. There's all the critters in the landscape. For instance, what you will see, and there's an excursion that takes you to an island where you can go and watch puffins. Puffins are the birds that you see here on the right-hand side of your picture. These are Atlantic puffins. There are 4 kinds of puffins in the world, but these are the only ones that live in Iceland. And as it happens in many countries that are where nature is so overwhelming and where humans are somewhat limited, there are about 20 times as many puffins in Iceland as there are people. And the puffins on the right-hand side of your image really are very uncomfortable to be in the same image with this white-tailed eagle. Because guess what the white-tailed eagle likes to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Puffins. The white-tailed eagle is not a national bird of Iceland, but it is a bird that you see there quite often. It is a slightly larger European cousin of the bald eagle. So imagine it just has the white in the wrong part of the body, but otherwise you would imagine that it could be a bald eagle. And then, of course, in the water, you may find seals. These are harbor seals. You see two kinds of seals in Ísafjörður, the harbor seals and the gray seals. And the gray seals are sometimes called horsehead seals. And once you see a gray seal, you will kind of go like, well, it doesn't have a mane, it doesn't have ears, but the rest of the face looks a little bit like a horsehead. And that's how you can easily tell them apart. So the focus on Ísafjörður, again, is a lot on nature, is a lot on what you can do in the great outdoors. There's also an excursion that takes you to a neighboring town where you can learn a little bit more about the history and the traditions of fishing. Ísafjörður is still a very, very important fishing port, but it's always been, fishing has always been an incredibly important part of the culture here. And so you'll find, actually in Iceland, there's more than just one fishing museum. They're always done with a lot of love. They're always done with a great deal of care because it's such an integral part of the culture. From Ísafjörður then, we continue on to Akureyri. And Akureyri is on the northern side of Iceland. It's only about 100 kilometers, so that's 60 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And it has about 20,000 inhabitants, so it's not very large. But then again, Iceland overall has about 350,000 inhabitants, and about a third of those live in and around Reykjavik. So for Iceland, this is a fairly decent sized city, the capital of the north. Here we offer an excursion that takes you through Akureyri itself, but then it also roams a little, the other excursions roam a little further afield. The town is more or less the gateway to a spectacular part of the island. You have, and I'll show you another picture here. These are the Godafoss, the waterfalls of the gods, if you will. And there's a legend about a priest and a pagan shaman, if you will, who decided together to throw their carved images of false gods into the waterfall. And it's said that that was kind of the start of Christianity, if you will, in Iceland. Godafoss is on at least 3 excursions that depart from Akureyri. And of course, what you will also see in Akureyri, depending on the shore excursion that you pick, is a very famous lake and a very famous, again, it's a geothermal area with a lot of fumaroles. Those are basically, if you will, rock sculptures with vents down into the earth that, natural rock sculptures, that is, where steam comes out of the ground. Fumaroles, hot mud pots are places where you can see this blubber coming out of the ground that is very hot. And of course, there are pools that you can sit in, pools that you can bathe in. This is an incredible pastime in much of Iceland. We offer you the opportunity to bathe as Icelanders do in these natural pools in at least 2 places, and we're working on a 3rd place where you can do this. A little further away from Reykjavik, a little further away from the crowds, to be able to provide you with agreeable social distancing, if you will. And then another place that is very, very interesting, not far from Akureyri, is the Laufus farm. This gives you an idea. This is, if you will, more of an open air museum. There's a lot that is still working on this farm, but it's not a commercial farm anymore. It tells you a lot about the history of Iceland in its very poor days. And really, the 20th century brought a degree of wealth. And then after World War II, And during World War II, Iceland became a very important strategic point for the Americans and for the Brits to counter what the Germans were doing in the North Atlantic. And this gave an enormous upswing in infrastructure in Iceland. And so post-World War II Iceland is really kind of what we know today. It's much more modern until World War II, but especially until the turn of the 20th century. Icelanders were people that lived in houses that were kind of built into the ground. They had sheep. They didn't have a lot of cows. They had their horses, but by and large, the population was relatively poor and had to make do with what the countryside would give them. And that wasn't a lot. It is not a particularly hospitable island, as you can imagine. It just so happens that in the word Akureyri, Akur is a word that basically, and you can find that there's a little bit of the English word acre in it. Akur is land. It's basically, it was one of the few places in Iceland where people looked around and said, okay, well, this is pasture land. This is land that we can actually do something with from an agricultural perspective. From Akureyri, then we proceed to Seyðisfjörður, and there we are on the east side of the island. And again, Seyðisfjörður is another one of the towns that boomed in the early 20th century, and this is what you will now recognize. It looks a little bit, it's actually, if you will, it's a little bit prettier even than Ísafjörður. The blue church here in this picture especially is kind of a highlight. Has a lot of these early 20th century buildings that were in big chunks, if you will, imported from Norway. Just like the other towns, it has a bit of a history in fishing. It was also a very important trading post. And trading, that was, again, it had a lot to do with fish. There were eiderdown became very quickly a very important export article. Eider ducks are in Iceland by the hundreds of thousands, and the down of eider ducks is warmer than anything else in the world that you can think of. Sheep wool was exported, and Seyðisfjörður was one of those places where a lot of ships went, particularly to Denmark. For a good 500 years, Denmark controlled all of the trade that came from Iceland, and Seyðisfjörður basically exported whatever they could to Denmark under conditions that frankly still rankle many an Icelander today. Of course, things have changed, and it's not quite that bad, but I think you could still talk to some really old Icelanders and find that there is not a lot of love lost for the Danes. This town, because it's very small, we explored it on foot. Seyðisfjörður has about 2,000 inhabitants. Easy to walk around. It has a little museum that tells the story of World War II, which is quite interesting, and that you can visit in combination with a scenic drive around the town. We take you into the world of the elves, and this is a little silly perhaps for some people, but Icelanders, to a very high degree, still believe in the forces of nature, and it's hard to not understand this if you live in a country where nature is all around you. And elves are really just forces of nature that sometimes help you and sometimes get in your way. There are good elves, there are bad elves, and think of them as a personification of nature that is all around you, and that has an enormous influence on the way you lead your daily life. One of the great things to do in Seyðisfjörður is also to visit the Skálana's Nature Center, which is just a little bit outside of town. And this is where you can actually see the eider ducks. They have a little, it's a natural center where there is a little bit of a combination of culture and nature. So there's an awful lot of birds that you can view there. There are a few ponds that are right along the coast. And there's also a place where you can actually see how the eiderdown is collected, how it's cleaned. I believe that they even will sell you a duvet, not for the faint-hearted when it comes to the price tag. This is a great place, and this is a perfect slide also to talk a little bit about food. And this is almost somewhat of an intermezzo. As soon as it is feasible, we will bring you again into restaurants, and as much as we have social distancing down pat to a science, we do it now. We have some excursions that already offer you meals as part of the experience, but it's a little bit more limited than it would normally be. The dishes, this is steamed cod with potatoes, very simple dish. Many dishes in Iceland, of course, have to do with fish, and many of Iceland's favorite dishes have to do with these years before the 20th century when people ate everything they could, and certainly didn't throw anything away. So there's a fish dish, and I need to think of the name, and I'll think about it in a second, but there's a fish dish that basically, now you just use nice chunks of cod or other fish, but it used to be that it was just the leftovers. It's kind of a stump of potatoes, some herbs, and then whatever leftover fish you have. And the beautiful thing of Icelandic restaurants, and we copy this a little bit on the ship as well, is that Iceland now is so proud of that culture that they take these dishes for the poor, if you will, and they turn it into fine cuisine. Another great favorite is the cod cheek, and you get it's not for the faint-hearted. You get a codfish head on your table, and Icelanders will tell you that the best part of the cod is really the muscle that's in the cheek of the cod. So an acquired taste, without a doubt, especially if you think about things like hakkarl, which is fermented shark that is allowed to sit in the ground for a while. Icelanders swear by it, and you should at least have a little bite. And then it's a perfect excuse. Icelanders like to have a little bit of hakkarl and then brennivin. And brennivin is, of course, a highly alcoholic beverage of that is traditional also in think about it as the Icelandic version of gin, if you will, with local herbs to give it its flavor. Next town on this itinerary is Djúpivogur, and here this is a tiny little town. This has about 243, maybe 244 inhabitants. And I'm kidding, of course, but it has only a few hundred inhabitants. And it makes it a perfect place to just walk off the ship. Most of the things that you can do here are walks. There are walks along a black sand beach. There are walks along ponds with local bird life. There are walks along the what is there in the town itself, and it's a small little fishing port. Probably one of the most, certainly the most famous site to see in Djúpivogur when it comes to the cultural site. And now you'll be a little surprised because I'm showing you these gannets. This is a white gannet. There is along the shoreline in Djúpivogur, a local artist has these 34 granite eggs, and they are about 2 to 3 feet in diameter. And the local artist went and found granite in China. He spends part of his time in China and part of his time in Iceland. And he found this granite he shaped it the way that the eggs of the local bird population look. And so it's quite amazing because these are these huge scale models. He's found granite in the exact color of the eggs, in the exact shape of the eggs. And ornithologists will just be stunned by this. Anyone that has a heart for public art will think it's just, really interesting and fun. But ornithologists can look at the little plaques and identify every one of these local birds. You have the Latin name, you have the Icelandic name. It could be, for people that are really into birds, just an ornithologist delight, if you will, this excursion. Next slide shows you a little bit of what I was talking about, the black sand beaches that you find in many places in Iceland, but Djúpivogur is just a perfect place to do just this. There isn't a lot else around, and it's quiet. You can find a little bit of solitude. It's a perfect place to enjoy a very pristine and a very untouched side of Iceland. What you will find almost everywhere in Iceland are these guys. Sheep have for centuries been what kept Icelanders alive. The meat, the wool to export, the wool to stay warm. If you want to get an idea of how important the sheep were to Icelanders before the 20th century, there's a beautiful book called Ordinary People by Halldór Laxness, and he is the only Icelander that won the Nobel Prize. Not so surprising, Iceland is a very small country. It's actually no mean feat by Halldór Laxness that he did win the Nobel Prize. Ordinary People is about a sheep farmer, and it's an interesting book. It's probably something that every kid in Iceland has to read at some stage, and it gives you an idea of what life was like before the 20th century and how important the sheep were. A man's riches were really counted in sheep. When we leave Djúpivogur, then we continue on to the Westman Islands. And a Westman to the Icelanders was someone from Ireland. Long before even the Vikings first set foot ashore, monks from Ireland were already casting about in the North Atlantic to find places where they could be missionaries. They didn't last very long in Iceland because there was no one there to convert to Christianity. But the Vikings and the Westmen, the men from Ireland, did at some point in history intersect, and that's when the Westman Islands got their name. They're very small, and out of those 5 million Atlantic puffins in all of Iceland, you find at least 1.5 million on Heimaey, which is the island that we visit. The archipelago has about 15 islands, and then a lot of very, very small things that are not called islands but sker in Icelandic. Not really worth, it's a rock and it's very uncomfortable if you bump into it with a ship, but to call it an island is a little much. So 15 islands, only one that is inhabited, and that's the island we visit. There are a handful of things here that are really interesting and appealing and that we want to share with you. One of which is the 1973 volcanic eruption that had the entire island, all 5,000 people in the island, evacuated. And some people come back to their homes that were now completely covered in lava. There's a museum that actually shows one of those houses that was dug out pretty much in the place where it was, and it will give you, you can talk about what impact a volcanic eruption has on an area all you like, but to see it in this museum it takes your breath away of how what kind of a force is unleashed during these volcanic eruptions. The other part, of course, in Heimaey is are the cliffs. The cliffs with the puffins and with all the other birds, the guillemots, the cormorants that live on these very, very steep cliffs. And you would ask yourself, why? It's steep, there's not a lot of room. Sounds uncomfortable. The birds build their nests there. It's not free of danger. And of course, this is precisely why the birds are there. These birds that live on these cliffs are expert cliff dwellers. This gives them safety. This gives them safety from large predators. They're expert flyers, and they are experts in building their nests where no one else wants to go. So these cliffs, rather than being an inconvenience, actually provide a degree of protection. There is something else that is quite interesting when it comes to the natural world in Heimaey, and that is a facility that rescues these critters, these beluga whales. There's about 11 or 12 species of whales that you might find around Iceland, and many of them are there year-round. The belugas are part of that population. This facility that we take you to is not a zoo. It's not even a place where these belugas stay for a very long time. Captive belugas are brought here and are reacquainted with the wild. And once they have completely acclimatized, part of this, for instance, is belugas that are kept in facilities with warmer water need to get used again. And this makes perfect sense, of course. Even a beluga needs to get used again to the colder water. And so these animals are kept there until they're ready to leave. The enclosure opens up and off they go into the wild. There's room in this facility for about 15 of them. Right now, they only have 2. So you never quite know how many belugas there are, but the facility does allow you to get a really good idea of what the natural world is like for a beluga. There are experts there that spend day in, day out with these animals. It's also a great place to see them up close. They're very curious animals. They're very smart animals. And it is a place like really no other place where you can have, on the one hand, you have pretty much the natural surroundings, and at the same time, you can get up close and personal with the belugas. And once we're done in the Westman Islands, in Heimaey, we will then return to Reykjavik. And that is where your cruise and my presentation comes to an end. And that means it's time for your questions. And that means it's time for Heather.
Thank you, Joost. We've had lots of questions in. I'll start with one from Linda in Chicago, but there's lots of people asking similar questions. And she says, when will Viking open more spots on the sold-out excursions?
When will Viking open more spots? As soon as we can. This is literally, and I see this because the if you will, those shore excursions added, those spots, they go across my desk. We do this on an almost daily basis, and we're constantly backfilling, if you will, doing this as quickly as we can. And I appreciate that, coming back from a world where this was just something that we did week in, week out with our partners locally, emerging from a COVID world and still having shore excursions available where we practice social distancing, where we keep you safe. It's a little bit different, and so it's unfortunately, to get started, it's a little on the slow side, but I can guarantee you that you will have a splendid experience, and that you will have most of the experiences that I just painted for you.
Wonderful, thanks, Joost.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question comes from Dave in Prairie Village, and he says, is business class air available through Viking?
Business class air is available as long as as long as it's available for us, for Viking, to provide to you. It depends a little bit on the airlines that fly into Iceland. I think it's somewhat limited at the moment. But if it's available to the public at large, it's available to you through Viking, because we do maintain very good relationships, obviously, with Iceland Air.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question comes from Barbara in Dover in the United States, and she says, is there still an active volcano on the island? And if so, will we have the chance to see it?
There is, and there's a very small one right now, just on the horizon from Reykjavik, where you can see the smoke coming up. Yes, it's a very active volcanic island altogether. There are far more than just one. There are quite a few of them. Nothing quite as spectacular as Eyjafjallajökull in 2010. You may remember that. That was quite spectacular. It stopped all air traffic for weeks on end all over Europe and all over the North Atlantic.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Ali in Oakville in Canada, and she says, is there a strong sulfurous smell in Iceland?
In some places there is, but it's not like you smell it everywhere. Absolutely not. No. So it's in any of the areas where you have these geological features where literally the smoke is coming out of the ground. Yes, there is going to be sulfur.
Thank you. Marianne in the United States says, will the Blue Lagoon be seen from any of the included excursions? And if not, which optional excursions will take you to the Blue Lagoon?
Right now, the Blue Lagoon is one of the places where we are not comfortable bringing you because of social distancing rules. We do have baths available to you, and all over Iceland you have these baths. The Blue Lagoon happens to be the most famous of these, and it's because it's just outside of Reykjavik. But there are baths all over the island. And we will take you to baths. You'll have an opportunity to sit in one of these in other places around the island. As soon as we believe that it is prudent to do so, we'll bring you back to the Blue Lagoon. But I cannot say when this is.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Helen in Toronto, and she says, how long are the daylight hours during the summer?
Well, right now the sun sets in Iceland close to about 11, and it gets up again around 4 or 5. So you have somewhere between, in summer you have somewhere between 18 and 20 hours of daylight.
Wow, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Carol in Tucson says, maybe I missed it, but when can you see the Aurora Borealis?
Aurora Borealis, it has to be dark for that. So that's in winter. And that starts in December. Best Aurora Borealis is in January and in February. And they have it in Iceland. If you want to see it with Viking, you'll need to go on our Northern Lights cruises. They show you the Northern Lights in Norway.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Bill in the United States, and he says, how many ports will we need to use a tender?
How many ports will we need to use a tender? I believe there's only one. I believe, yes. It's, let me just, I need to check my notes here real quick, sorry. I think in Djúpivogur we might need to use a tender. Yes, but overall, the facilities are there, the docking facilities are there. As in some cases, you'll have more than one ship. It depends a little bit, but so far we've been quite lucky with what came back from Iceland when it came to our docking spaces.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Margaret. I think you did cover this at the beginning. She says, we have an Icelandic friend who lives in Akureyri. She wants to meet us at the ship and take us to her house for lunch. Will we be able to do this without being part of a tour?
At this current stage, no. We would completely lose control over who you are in contact with. And that's at this stage not something that we can be comfortable with. But again, you know, we look at this, and right now, you know, as you may know, we have cruises around the UK right now, we almost on a daily basis evaluate how things are going. We're very lucky in that things are going really well, and we want to keep it that way. And so we will gradually build back the experience we have, and we will gradually loosen the restrictions that we feel are necessary to give you a great and safe experience.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Gloria in the United States, and she says, will this cruise eventually be offered during the winter months?
Will this cruise eventually be offered during the winter months? I would never say never, but the water around Iceland gets a little choppy in winter. And that makes it, in and by itself, that is not the end of the world. But in some cases, if you look at a map of Iceland, some of the ports are relatively narrow. And if there's too much wave action and too much wind action, it sometimes makes it impossible for us to dock. And then at some stage we need to kind of balance. Okay, Iceland is still spectacular in winter. But is it, how many times can we not dock, or how many times do we risk not being able to dock before, it takes a lot of the fun out of the whole experience? And at that point we would say, no, we can't reasonably offer it because there's just too big of a risk that we would not be able to dock where we want to dock. And that might happen on more than one day. So I don't know. I think we will see how this develops. Iceland clearly has enormous interest from people around the world. And I would never say never.
Thank you, Joost. Linked to that, Elaine in Dallas says, will Viking have Iceland cruises in 2022?
Yes, we will. Yes, that much we know, because we do already have an Iceland cruise that you will currently also find on our website, Majestic Iceland. So it's there.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from John in the US, and he says, are there any viewing opportunities for the Perseids meteor shower?
That is very, very tricky, because you have an awful lot of daylight in summer, and on top of that, if you go a little later in summer, then you may end up with cloud cover. So we when it comes to these type of things, we would not really advertise or organize around it. We would just have people on the alert on the ship to be there if it happens. But those are things, celestial events are very difficult to predict in these latitudes.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Bishop Richard in Pompton Plains, and he says, it's interesting to hear about the birds and the sea life, but are there land animals in Iceland other than the formerly domesticated animals brought by settlers? So I think he's asking, are there any mammals that you can spot?
Foxes, yes, but difficult, I would say. You would really have to go quite far into the back country. Because a lot of it has been, over the centuries, been somewhat domesticated at least. And you can imagine that these sheep farmers of old would have hunted foxes, because foxes are not good for sheep. So they're there, but they're further away from the ports.
Thank you. Karen in Phoenix says, how cold does it get in July?
How cold does it get in July? It doesn't go much below, I would say, 50, 55. In the evenings, it can be a little nippy, but it's not. Iceland has benefits from relatively warm Gulf streams in the North Atlantic. So it is not as cold as you would imagine it to be, especially not if you stay close to the shore. The north tends to be a little colder. Reykjavik, for instance, you can go to Reykjavik in January, and it can be a balmy 40 degrees.
Great, thank you, Joost. Lauren in the United States says, generally, when is the first snowfall in Iceland?
September.
Great, thank you. Larry in the United States says, would you recommend bringing hiking boots?
Yes, I would. Because in most areas you have really good walkways. In some areas, and on the beaches you have it's a little uneven, and it's a little bit more fun if you have good shoes. Then you can venture a little further. And the hikes, as we've set them up, especially around Djúpivogur, are done in a way that you have short, medium, longer hikes. So I would bring hiking boots if that's what you like to do. Then yeah, do bring them.
Thank you. Jill is just asking about some of our protocols and says, do we have to wear a mask, and if so, under what circumstances?
I'm always hesitant to answer this question, because the question is, when are you traveling? Our protocols right now, as of today, say you need to wear a mask when you're in a public area, in a social setting, both on and off the ship. But as you probably know, these things change virtually by the day, or at least by the week. And we obviously want you, and this is where we always need to strike a balance. We want you to be comfortable. We want you to feel like you're emerging from a COVID world. At the same time, we want to keep you safe. So at this stage, the protocol is masks. We're, as things open up, I think we're weeks away from loosening up at least some of this, as the countries that we travel to are loosening their restrictions.
Thank you. Question from Mary Lee in the US. She says, can you tell us what the tipping protocol is for the local guides?
You would have to look that up online. It's the tipping protocol is, there is a recommendation. It's entirely up to your discretion, and it is a few euros, a few dollars, or in local currency. It's entirely up to your discretion. But it ranges between $1 and $3, I would say.
Thank you. Patty in the United States says, will we be going far enough north to cross into the Arctic Circle?
No. Iceland is south of the Arctic Circle, and you don't quite get there, but you get close enough.
Great, thank you. Amanda in San Diego says, is it possible to go to Greenland as well?
Not currently. We do, once we're back to our regular Iceland cruises, we do have an extension that takes you to Greenland.
Great, thank you. Stephen in the United States says, what about Iceland will likely be most pleasantly interesting to a first-time visitor?
Everything, really. Okay, so the only city really that from an outsider's perspective probably deserves that word is Reykjavik, and it's fun. It is very colorful. It's a little quirky. You have the old port. You have a lot of little museums that are really well done. You have a lot of really nice little viewpoints and things like that. Once it's easier to move around and about a little bit. There are great restaurants and coffee shops. But right now, even the places that you see on an organized visit, they're colorful. It's a really interesting little city, and everything outside of Reykjavik it's unlike most landscapes that you will see anywhere. I mean, obviously, nature is why you go to Iceland. mainly. But the towns all have a lot of flavor. The towns all have are deeply rooted in their own history. And once you warm up to the Icelanders themselves, they're really interesting people. They come across at first as a little reserved, but I found them to be really warm in their very own way.
Great, thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Tracy in Houston, and she says, will we stay in sight of the shore as we are sailing around Iceland?
So the question really is, will it get a little choppy here and there? I think that's how I interpret the question. You do go in and out, and again, we choose summer because it doesn't get quite as choppy as it does sometimes in late fall or in winter. I think you'll be fine. Overall, you'll be fine. And if that is a concern, I would travel more in summer than towards September. That's all I can tell you.
Great, thank you. Dwayne in the United States says, regarding the active volcano topic, could you tell us which specific excursions are most likely to see molten lava?
Let me think. That's a tough one because the only place that I can think of is just outside of Reykjavik, and we currently do not take people there because there's no infrastructure. So that is a somewhat hard one. Yeah, no, I don't know that we do this at this stage. Also, keep in mind that this is not a place. It's and maybe you're coming from this with a Hawaiian background where you can go and get really close. The difficulty is that it's a very different volcanism that you have in Hawaii than what you have in Iceland. Iceland tends to be quite a bit more explosive. So there is no permanent access to molten lava, simply because when the going gets rough, it really gets rough. It's not this seeping volcanic action. It's much more explosive.
Thank you. Our next question is from Doris in the United States, and she says, what kind of rain gear is recommended to bring along?
I would bring just a windbreaker. You know, everything under it, you know, that depends a little bit on the temperature outside. It can be quite nice and it can still rain. Iceland is at a latitude where it can potentially rain throughout the year. Not saying every day, but it's not like in the Western United States where you can be pretty sure that any given day in July it's probably not going to rain. You don't have that in Iceland. So I would always bring a light jacket. And if you forget them, we have brilliant ones on the ship. Viking red with a little Viking logo. I wear those, and they're really good. My kid, who's 16, he said, "Dad, I wore your jacket. I want one," the other day.
That's great. Thank you, Joost. Anthony in the Villages in the United States says, are there any visa requirements for Iceland?
Nope. No visa requirements for Iceland.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question is from Marsha in Valley Centre. She says, will we be able to get one of Reykjavik's famous cinnamon rolls while we're there?
Well, currently we don't have anywhere in Reykjavik where we can take you safely. We will have cinnamon rolls on the ship, though. And they are, if you will, they're from the same, they have the same cultural background. They're brilliant. I've had, because ours are Norwegian, obviously, and you can get them in Momsen's, and the Icelandic and the Norwegian cinnamon rolls, they're quite similar. So If we can't get them to you in Reykjavik, you'll have them on the ship, and they'll be just as good. How's that?
Wonderful, thank you. Another question from Anthony in the Villages. He says, are there any excursions that go to the geothermal aspects of Iceland, such as to see the geysers or the hydroelectric plant?
Yes. So the first one I described, the Golden Circle, that has geothermal features throughout. The geyser, the mud pots, the fumaroles, and there are quite a few other places as well. From near Mývatn, for instance, you also have Mývatn. You also, and that's in the north. You also have geothermal features. They're all over Iceland, really, and the pools that we take you to are the same thing. They're geothermal features. It's literally all over the island.
Thank you. Next question is from Georgia in Macungie in the United States, and she says, is this trip and the land tours okay for somebody with limited mobility?
Yes, I think it is. I do think that you will be, that not every excursion would be for you, but this is why we offer a range of different things to do.
Great, thank you, Joost. Next question comes from Nancy, and she just asks, how many passengers does the ship hold?
The ship normally holds 930 guests. And what we're doing to start off with is we limit the number of guests on the first journeys. And as we see that things are really going well, we will rapidly increase to make sure that everyone has a spot.
Thank you. Another question about the coast. This one's from Dennis in Chapel Hill, and he says, will you be able to see the coast while the ship is between ports? And this is because he'd like to look at the view. He's not so worried about the choppiness.
Okay, yes, but you're also, every once in a while, you're also completely out of view. But yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the cities, the first thing that comes to mind is both Seyðisfjörður and Ísafjörður. They're on fjords, so you have to kind of sail inland quite a bit. Same thing is true for Akureyri. You do travel inland quite a bit. So yes, it's a really good question, actually. Getting into port and leaving port again, spectacular, yes.
Fantastic, thank you. Our next question comes from Miki in Montclair, and she says, do you have Icelandic entertainment on the ship at night?
Björk is unavailable. No, I'm kidding. The local entertainment is at this stage still a little hard to do. There are, we're a little concerned about what we bring on shore. Normally, yes, we do. So as soon as we're back in normal operations, you would find local Icelandic entertainment on the ship. Not every night, but certainly on some nights, yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Tammy in Edmonton in Canada says, are all these cruises sold out, or is there still any availability for the last ones?
There is availability. They're doing really well. They're doing really well, but there's still availability, yes.
That's great, thank you. Next question from Beverly in the United States, and she says, is it possible to do more than one excursion in a day? When you sign up, will the times be given?
Yes, you will be given times as you sign up. There's always a time slot, and yeah, you can absolutely do more than one shore excursion. Part of the exercise that my team is going through right now is to really make sure that given that right now there's limited, we can't let you off the ship on your own. We need to make sure that you still have a lot of time in port. So the idea is that, yes, you can absolutely do anywhere from 1 to 3, perhaps 4 shore excursions, as much as possible, because we still want you to experience the port, obviously. That's why you travel with us.
Thank you, Joost. And then Harry in Springfield says, is it possible to book excursions on the ship?
Yes, yes. So we try to offer you as much as possible to be booked in advance, given that some of these cruises are right around the corner. Given that fact, we will continue to add shore excursions, and we will continue to add slots on those shore excursions. Not until the very last minute, but for quite a while still. And some of this you will be able to book on board, yes.
Thank you. Question from Rick and Linda in Houston, and they say, this will be our very first sea cruise with Viking. We've taken 3 river cruises before. What can we expect that's different on the sea cruise experience?
Let's see. So ship's bigger, that allows you more public spaces. You will have, like on the river ships, you have one lounge. You'll have way more than one lounge. You'll have all these wonderful public spaces where you can kind of sit in a corner and read a book, or you'll have a conversation with some people that you just met. There's a wider range of food choices. And what I always think, and I'm telling you this, and I should give you a little bit of my background. I started with Viking a long time ago, and for the longest time, the river ships were all we had. So I transitioned from dealing only with river ships to the ocean vessels. And the beautiful thing I find that when you walk onto an ocean ship is it feels totally familiar. It's much bigger, obviously. It's about 4 times the size of a river ship when you just count the number of guests, but or 5 times. But you walk onto the ship and you're like, yeah. Mm-hmm. You look around and you're like, yeah, this is a Viking ship, and those are Viking staff. And the good things, really, I think the great things about Viking are on both ships. Your great staff, friendly people, not fussy, just friendly, just normal people. Great spaces, not with crystal chandeliers that steal the show. We want our guests to be comfortable. It's not by accident that we call our grandest space on the ocean ship, we call it the living room. That's kind of, that's the sense that we want to give you. And it works really well. So you'll feel right at home.
Thank you, Joost. We have a couple of questions about this, so I'll just read this one from Linda in Chicago. So she's asking about the first day when they arrive into Reykjavik, before they board the ship. Are they able to then walk around a bit and do things on their own before they've got on board?
Once you've done a COVID test, right now the regime is still that we want you to have a test, and once those results are in, we can let you roam around the ship freely. Between getting the test and going onto the ship, obviously we would want you to stay in an area where you do not interact with others, because otherwise the test kind of becomes a little pointless. To be frank, we hope that by the time that you travel with us, we will have a little bit of wiggle room. If that's not the case, then we will make sure that you're really comfortable on the ship or in a facility on shore, where we make sure that you are not bored, that you have something to drink, something to eat, something comfortable to sit, to rest a little bit. We know that a lot of flights arrive early in Reykjavik. So we're actively looking at how things develop to create that first day as a really good experience. And that may also involve that we just take you inside our bubble on a coach to see something of the city, just so that you have something to do, and we still have you a little bit in our bubble, if you will.
Thank you, Joost. Patricia in Jacksonville says, is it possible on one of the Viking excursions to take a boat tour through Glacier Bay and to see Diamond Beach?
If we're talking about the same thing, then we're not close enough to that area. So the answer, sadly, to that is no.
Thank you. Another question about what to bring from Louise in the United States, and she says, would you recommend bringing a winter coat?
If you travel in September, maybe. I would not, though. I would not. I tell you exactly what I'm bringing, even in September. I'm bringing a sweater like this one, and I'm bringing my rain jacket. And then I'm wearing a shirt or maybe another t-shirt. Layering is in my mind just the best way to go. I would not recommend bringing a winter coat. It's going to take up a lot of space in your suitcase, and chances are that you will not need it all that much.
Thank you. I know that shopping and exploring the shops independently might be a little difficult, but Karen in Phoenix in the United States says, what products should you look for if you're shopping locally?
It depends a little bit on where you go. I would bring maybe a bottle of Brennivit, the local strong alcoholic drink. I would, depending on where you are, I would bring. So I told you about the eggs. These are enormous gargantuan eggs along the water's edge in Djúpivogur, and you can get little replicas of these. That would be my favorite thing to bring back. There are a lot of things that are made out of rocks. There are a lot of wool things. Obviously, you would want to buy a wool sweater or a wool cap. They put the sheep in Iceland to work really well. Any kind of it's a great place if you are a rock hound, if you like to collect different types of rock. It's all over the island, of course, and a lot of it is really well done and worked into souvenirs. But the wool, some of the foodstuffs, the rocks, those are the kind of things that I would come back with, I think.
Fantastic, thank you, Joost. Next, we've got a couple more questions about the Golden Ring tour. Could you just go over what is included in that, or if it's one of the optionals?
It's an optional tour, and it includes the Althing, so the oldest parliament in the world. That's a big attraction, and the beautiful thing there is that you can actually really sort of walk across from the North American plate to the Atlantic plate. So it's the Mid-Atlantic rift that goes right through the park. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Then you see the geyser, the Story Geyser, the geyser that actually gave the name geyser to this geological feature. And then you see the waterfall, the Golden Waterfall, and there are some other geothermal features that you see. I think that's it. I think I covered them all. Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. And that links to a question from Daniel in Canada, who says, can you tell us where we will be able to see the waterfalls?
Well, there are the waterfalls in Iceland are everywhere, for starters, but the big two are probably in the so on the golden circle you have the Gullfoss and the Golden Waterfall, and then you have the Godafoss, which is near Akureyri. And those are the two big ones. They're both part of the excursions. The Godafoss in particular is part of, I think, 75%. 3 out of 4 excursions out of that port go there.
Great, thank you. Sherry in Montgomery says, is this cruise suitable for a solo female traveller?
Yes, of course. And I've said this before. I think one of the great things about our ships are these public spaces. The living room is such a great place to just meet people. I don't think you'll be you know, you'll be alone as much as you like, and you will be with other people as much as you like, because that's what the ships are for. I love it, for instance, every once in a while to just find a corner on the ship. I always bring books, and you just sit in, and you don't have to bring books. This is the beautiful thing. I can't help myself, but the ship has these phenomenal libraries. You'll find a book in the library, and you just, you know, you kind of steal away in a corner, and you can do your own thing for a little bit. And then you walk out of your corner, and there's people in, you know, in little groups everywhere on the ship. I think it's not a problem at all. I think you'll enjoy yourself.
Wonderful, thank you, Joost. Nancy in the US says, can you tell us about the opportunities to go kayaking?
At this stage, we have that in Ísafjörður, and that's because if you look at a map, there is the harbor of Ísafjörður is relatively sheltered, so it's a perfect place to do it. And so far, that's the only place where we do it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joost. I think that's probably all we have time for tonight. We just have a couple of comments and people have sent in, which might be useful to share. So Alison says, regarding what to buy in Iceland, she brought home salt. She says they had 3 different flavours. It was inexpensive and lightweight. She bought them at the local supermarket in Reykjavik, and everyone loved it.
Yes, and if you forget, you can buy those at the airport as well. That's a really good idea. Yes, yes.
Wonderful. And I'll just end with this comment from Patty in Ramona in the United States. And she says, I just want to thank Viking for keeping things fluid during these COVID times. She appreciates the safety of the bubble when necessary, but hopes for the possibility of a little more freedom by the time we get there.
Excellent. That's a very good note to end with.
Great. Thank you, Joost.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. See you in another week.